I still remember the sound of the coffee cup hitting the floor. One second I was walking into the conference room with everyone's drink orders, the next, hot coffee splashed across my boss's expensive suit and the polished wooden table. The room went completely silent. He stared at me like I'd committed a crime instead of making an accident. Then, in front of 12 coworkers, he pointed toward the door. "Pack your things. You're done." I laughed because I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. 3 months later, I watched the same man walk out of that building carrying a cardboard box with security following behind him. The company he'd ruled with fear was gone. His career was over, and somehow that coffee spill turned out to be the beginning of everything. I never imagined a simple accident would expose secrets that had been buried for years. At the time, I was 29 and worked as an operations coordinator for a fast-growing logistics company in Chicago. It wasn't glamorous work, but I liked solving problems and keeping projects moving. Most of my coworkers were great people, and I'd spent nearly 4 years building a reputation for being dependable. The only downside was my manager, Richard. Richard believed fear was the best leadership strategy. Every meeting felt like a performance where someone had to be humiliated. If deadlines slipped, he blamed employees. If clients complained, he blamed employees. If something went right, he congratulated himself. Everyone avoided being alone with him. That Monday morning was already stressful. A major client meeting was starting early, and Richard demanded that I pick up coffee for everyone because his assistant had called in sick. I balanced 2 drink carriers while opening the conference room door with my shoulder. Someone behind me bumped into my elbow. 1 cup tipped, the lid popped off, coffee landed right across Richard's jacket. "I'm so sorry," I said immediately. "I didn't even—" "Enough!" He slammed his hand on the table. The room froze. He stared at me. "You've embarrassed me in front of our biggest client." "It was an accident." "No, it was incompetence." The client actually tried to calm him down. "These things happen," she said with an awkward smile. Richard ignored her completely. "I don't employ incompetent people." I looked around the room expecting someone to say something. Nobody did. "Clean out your desk." That was it. 4 years of hard work ended in less than 30 seconds. Human Resources didn't even question it. Since Illinois is an at-will employment state, they processed the paperwork that afternoon. They called it a termination for poor performance, even though every annual review I'd ever received had been excellent. Walking out with my small box of belongings was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. For the next few weeks, I questioned everything. Maybe I should have argued harder. Maybe I should have refused to leave. Maybe I really had done something wrong. Finding another job wasn't easy. Every interview seemed promising until employers asked why I'd left my previous company. I hated explaining it. Meanwhile, former coworkers quietly reached out. "I can't believe what happened. He tells everyone you were careless. Things are getting even worse here." Apparently, Richard became even more aggressive after firing me. Employees quit almost every week. Departments missed deadlines because experienced workers kept leaving. One evening, my friend Melissa, who still worked there, invited me to dinner. She looked exhausted. "I almost quit today." "What happened?" She sighed. "Richard blamed me for losing a client." "Did you?" "No." She leaned closer. "I think he's changing numbers." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He keeps telling executives that projects are profitable even when they're losing money. Every report gets edited before anyone else sees it." That sounded dangerous, but surely finance would notice. "That's the weird part," she whispered. "People who ask questions suddenly disappear." I didn't know what to think. Richard was arrogant enough to manipulate reports, but fraud seemed like a huge leap. Life slowly moved on. About 6 weeks after being fired, I accepted a position at another logistics company. The pay was better, the culture was healthier. For the first time in years, my manager actually thanked people for doing good work. I realized how toxic my old job had been. Then, something unexpected happened. A recruiter contacted me on LinkedIn
asking if I'd be willing to discuss my experience at my previous company with outside investigators. At first, I assumed it was a scam. It wasn't. The company had hired an independent auditing firm after anonymous complaints about financial reporting. Apparently, several former employees had mentioned Richard's behavior. They wanted to know everything I'd seen. I told them the truth. I explained how Richard constantly pressured people to change reports, shift deadlines on paper, and make failing projects appear successful during executive meetings. I never imagined my small observations would matter. A month later, Melissa called me sounding both terrified and excited. "You won't believe today." "What happened?" "The auditors showed up without warning." My heart skipped. "They interviewed almost everyone." "And?" "They copied computers, they collected emails. Richard looked like he'd seen a ghost." For the next few weeks, rumors spread everywhere. Executives stopped visiting Richard's office. Finance managers suddenly attended department meetings. People whispered in hallways. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I received another message. It was just 6 words from Melissa. "It's over. Turn on the news." I searched the company name. The headline made me stare at my screen. The chief operations director had been terminated following an internal investigation into financial misconduct and falsified performance reporting. Richard. The article explained that millions of dollars in losses had been hidden by manipulating internal project reports. Those fake numbers convinced executives to approve expansions the company couldn't actually afford. Investors pulled funding almost immediately after the truth became public. Richard wasn't just fired, he was under investigation. I sat there in complete silence, not because I felt happy, because I couldn't believe how much damage one person had caused. A week later, Melissa filled in the missing pieces. Richard had spent years blaming employees whenever projects failed. Then he'd quietly alter documents before sending reports to upper management. When experienced workers questioned him, he'd label them difficult or incompetent until they either quit or got fired. The coffee incident was just one more excuse, but firing me created an unexpected problem. Without realizing it, he'd removed someone who kept detailed personal records of project timelines. When auditors interviewed me, my emails and calendar history contradicted his official reports. Then other employees produced their own records. The puzzle came together faster than anyone expected. The evidence wasn't just convincing, it was overwhelming. About 3 months after losing my job, I happened to drive by my old office during lunch. Curiosity got the better of me. I parked across the street. A crowd stood outside the entrance. Then I saw Richard. He carried a cardboard box filled with framed photos and office supplies. 2 security officers walked beside him. The same man who had publicly humiliated dozens of employees couldn't even look up from the sidewalk. For a brief second, our eyes met across the parking lot. I don't know if he recognized me. If he did, he gave no sign. He climbed into a taxi and disappeared. That was the last time I ever saw him. Months later, several former coworkers met for dinner. The atmosphere felt completely different. People laughed again. The company had promoted a respected manager who focused on teamwork instead of fear. Employee turnover dropped. Clients returned. Projects started succeeding because people no longer worked in constant panic. Melissa smiled at me. "You know something funny?" "What?" "If that coffee hadn't spilled." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That embarrassing accident had started a chain of events none of us could have predicted. Sometimes the moment that feels like the worst day of your life is actually pushing you towards something much better. Losing that job forced me into a healthier workplace, introduced me to leaders who valued honesty, and reminded me that character always matters more than power. Looking back, I don't remember the stain on Richard's expensive suit. I remember the lesson. People who build their success on intimidation can look unstoppable for years. But eventually, the truth catches up, and when it does, it usually arrives all at once. So if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't deserve, don't assume your story ends there. Sometimes justice doesn't happen immediately. Sometimes it quietly takes its time before showing everyone who was really responsible. And if you were standing in that conference room watching someone get fired over an honest mistake, would you have spoken up or stayed silent?